Here's a sentence you probably haven't heard on financial media this week. The person most likely to be the next Federal Reserve chair wants to shrink the Fed's balance sheet by $1 trillion. At the same time, he wants to cut interest rates. Those two things are supposed to work in opposite directions. So what's actually going on, and why does it matter to your mortgage payment, your 401k, and the interest your savings account is earning right now? That's what we're unpacking today. In plain language, no jargon, no agenda. Let's start with the plan itself. Kevin Warsh is Trump's likely pick for the next Fed chair. He's a former Fed governor, and he's been direct about his views. He thinks the Fed's balance sheet is too large. Right now, it's sitting at about $7 trillion. A significant portion of that is U.S. Treasury debt the Fed bought over the last decade and a half, primarily through the quantitative easing programs that followed the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID pandemic. His strategy goes like this: shrink the balance sheet by roughly $1 trillion while simultaneously cutting short-term interest rates. In theory, cutting short-term rates gives borrowers some relief on variable rate debt, things like credit cards, auto loans, etc. Meanwhile, shrinking the balance sheet is supposed to drain excess liquidity from Wall Street, so you're not just inflating asset prices further. Stimulate Main Street. Cool Wall Street. That's the pitch. Now let's talk about how the banking system actually responds to that, because that's where your household finances come into the picture. When the Fed shrinks its balance sheet, banks lose reserves. Reserves are the cash cushion banks hold to meet regulatory requirements and fund their lending operations. When those reserves shrink, banks get more conservative. They raise rates on corporate credit. They tighten standards on commercial real estate and small business loans. They widen mortgage spreads. So here's the problem. Even if the Fed cuts short-term rates, your actual mortgage rate, the rate on your small business loan, the rate your landlord is paying on their apartment building, those can stay stubbornly high or even go higher. The short-term rate cut and the real-world borrowing cost don't always move together. And honestly, the balance sheet shrinkage is one of the main reasons why. We've seen this play out before. Back in 2019, the Fed was in the middle of shrinking its balance sheet, and well, the repo market, which is the overnight lending market banks rely on to manage their daily cash needs, spiked to 10% almost overnight. That's not supposed to happen. The Fed reversed course within weeks. Then in March 2020, Treasury markets briefly froze entirely, and the Fed expanded its balance sheet dramatically to stabilize them. The pattern is consistent. Push balance sheet reduction hard enough, and the financial system hits a stress point that forces the Fed to reverse. And now, we're running that experiment with the largest debt load in American history, while foreign central banks are already pulling back from U.S. Treasury markets. Which brings us to the Mar-a-Lago Accord. Some people in Washington understand this tension well enough that they've been drafting blueprints to try to manage it. One of those, a 41-page document sometimes called the Mar-a-Lago Accord, lays out a series of aggressive proposals. Penalize foreign central banks financially if they reduce their treasury holdings to force continued demand. Offer U.S. allies 100-year bonds to restructure what they already hold. Engineer a weaker dollar through international coordination, similar to the Plaza Accord of 1985, to boost American exports. Coordinate between the Treasury and the Federal Reserve to cap long-term interest rates directly. Some of these ideas have historical precedent. The Plaza Accord did successfully weaken the dollar through international agreement. Treasury-Fed coordination happened after World War II and helped manage the debt load from that era. But here's the tension. Foreign central banks have already been reducing their exposure to U.S. Treasuries. Their share of the market has dropped from roughly 50% in the early 2010s to around 30% today. Proposals that penalize them for that behavior risk accelerating their exit rather than stopping it, which pushes long-term interest rates higher, not lower. Coercion doesn't tend to produce the kind of stable, cooperative treasury demand that keeps the system running smoothly. So, what does the Fed actually do? Realistically, there are three paths. The first is let rates rise and accept the consequences, which likely means a recession, a significant equity market correction, or both. That's politically and economically painful, and it's the least likely outcome. The second is expand the balance sheet again when stress appears, which is what's happened every time there's been a real crisis in the last 15 years. This is the reactive path. The third, and based on history the most likely, is what economists call financial repression. That means keeping interest rates just below the rate of inflation, so that the real value of the debt slowly erodes over time without anyone formally announcing it. So, let's say your savings account earns 4%. Inflation runs at 4.5 or maybe even 5. Your bond portfolio shows gains on paper, but in real purchasing power terms, you're actually losing ground every year. This is how the United States managed its debt after World War II. Debt to GDP was actually higher then than it is today, and it came down over decades, not through default or dramatic austerity, but through this quiet, gradual erosion. It's kind of like an inflation tax, and it works without a single vote in Congress. Now, some economists would point out correctly that this is ultimately a fiscal problem, not just a monetary one. The Fed can manage symptoms, but it can't treat the cause, which is structural deficit spending at a scale that monetary policy alone can't offset. That's a real debate happening in economic circles, and it's worth knowing it exists. But for your household, the question isn't which theory is right. It's what each scenario does to your money. If short-term rates come down, your variable rate debt gets cheaper. That's the benefit. Your credit card rate, your auto loan, your home equity line, those improve. But if balance sheet shrinkage tightens lending conditions, your mortgage rate and your business loan rate may not come down, or may not come down as much as the headline rate suggests. And if financial repression is the chosen path over the next decade, your cash savings and your bond holdings lose real purchasing power quietly year after year, while asset holders, people with real estate, stocks, hard assets, maintain or grow their position. Understanding those three dynamics puts you ahead of most people watching financial news right now, because most of that coverage is focused on the headline, rate number, and missing the fuller picture. That's what we're here for every Monday. No jargon, no agenda, just the connection between what's happening at the macro level and what it means for your family's financial security. If today helped you see that picture more clearly, subscribe so you're here next week. And if someone in your life has been asking why the Fed keeps making moves that don't seem to help regular people, send them this one. Now they'll have an answer. Until next time, I've been Kevin with moneytreeandme, providing better security and ensuring better lives. Thanks, everyone. Make it a great day.